Yes.
I think Paula wanted to start us off with a question. First, though, if you will just say your name and when and where you were born.
Lathia Paul Banks Jr., and I was born in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond.
Lathia, I've got some late breaking news for you. Your dad's building over in Titusville has recently been sold to a Black entrepreneur, and he's in the process now of renovating it for multi-purpose use, including a project that involves UAB and the city of Birmingham. What are your thoughts about that, the fact that your building is being repurposed for something?
Not to answer a question with a question, but you said multi-purpose. What are some of the purposes when you say multiple? Because if it's varying enough, it might be very interesting to see it happen.
Well, tell us some more about that building and how it came to be a part of your father's portfolio.
Well, my father was, what I put on his tombstone, a businessman, a minister, as well as a child of God. The child of God is what my father was, and just as all of us are on this planet. The businessman that he was expanded in over a 50-year period into the ministry that he went into before he passed. He lived for 93 years. That portion of, or that phase of his life that spanned between his, I guess, his adult years and about 70 was in the business community. So in the business community, he was an entrepreneur, second, but a builder of other Black businesses first in this area. And he continued that and was relatively very successful. He once said that he was the largest, second largest employer of minorities, of people in the city, second only to A.G. Gaston. So that he has this prominence as a pioneer in the business community.
Tell us a little bit about his early life, where he was born, when he was born, and his name.
He was born in 1922, and his story is a remigration story, if I can help you with somewhat of the theme of the stories that you take. And when we talk about the migration, we usually talk about that period of time between 1919, right after World War I, and 1970, when the Great Migration saw about 6 million people leave from the South and go to the North. When I say that his story is more of a re-migration, is because he was born in the South, educated in about 4 different disciplines. I like to say that he was a quadruple threat in real estate, in accounting, and he was in insurance, and then in law. And with that training, he migrated to the North where his mother was already there. His mother, Essie Johnson Banks, went to the North in the 30s to find employment for her 4 siblings. And he joined her after he finished his education, continued more education in D.C., met my mother, and that's why I ended up being born in Virginia, and then migrated after a period of time back to Birmingham. The 2 of them were in D.C., in Washington, right after World War II. And if you can kind of imagine the flow of people, of the millions that were going to the South and to the North and seeking employment and a better life. And then at one point, they too met in D.C. She from Birmingham, from a fairly prominent family, and moved they moved to D.C. and then moved back. So it's a re-migration story. So I was about 5 years old when we came back to Birmingham.
Where did you live when you came back?
Well, we were living in about 3 or 4 places. Initially, in the development in the Powderly community, there was a new development, and then we moved to Inslee, back to the home where he was raised by his great grandmother. His mother went to D.C. because her husband, Odie, died after a World War I related injury. So she went to D.C. in order to try to obtain some sort of a pension that they may have been available, being a black vet and not really being involved with the racism that was being perpetrated against vets at that time. She was able to get some semblance of a pension and send it back to her mother, Mariah, who was caring for the 4 children. So Mariah was a tremendous force. Her husband, E.P. Johnson, was the father of 4, but he had to leave at an early age because he was also from the islands, probably from which we got our interesting names, is that he had to leave because he was a root worker of sorts that worked on the wrong person, his patient being white. This is what we're being told, that, and therefore he left. One day, according to my grandmother and my aunts, one day he came home with a bag of groceries very hurriedly and gave to Mariah the food that he obtained, and he left. So Mariah had 4 children, and Lathia was one of her 4. And my father took that name from his uncle and raised them while Essie Johnson Banks was in D.C. So that's the connection in terms of how people flow for money, for reasons, out of poverty, and that's also blanketed with a lot of racism that was being perpetrated against us in the South, in terms of having land and not having land, having employment, and then having families that were able to recover or to expand based upon whatever inventiveness we could be able to obtain. My mother and my father we're talking about now. My grandmother remained in D.C., but my mother and my father, my mother came out of Parker High School, and during that time the government was hiring, in the early 50s and the late 40s, after the war, they were hiring a lot of clerical people for the computer. My mother went to A.G. Gaston Business College after Parker, learned clerical skills on the typewriter, and then she went to New York and to D.C. and lived in an area where there were very many dormitories for people working clerical in the government at the time. And it was during this time that she met my father. She from Birmingham in D.C. My father had another friend that was from Birmingham that introduced the 2 of them, and then they got married within 6 months. And then about 18 months later, here I was And so I have some pictures of it so I'm basing that on the fact that the pictures of my mother and father sitting in the couch, and it was dated 1948. So that's the year I was born. But she isn't, so I'm there, you know, in a different way, because she's not showing, you know. She's not showing, yeah, but I'm there, I'm in the picture too. So then, my father was, because I say he was in the 4 different disciplines. He was an insurance salesman for a short period of time, and in Richmond was where he had migrated shortly during the time that I was born. Went back to D.C., and then my father started getting offers to come back home. And my mother, in turn, being from D.C. and from Birmingham, and making a very good go of it in terms of being a housewife and supportive to him, was reluctant about coming back home, because that's the kind of person she was. She was a very great homemaker. But then after my father went and bought a house, you know, I remember him telling me that when he bought the house, Mama was so satisfied with the apartment that she was not interested in seeing the house. And as a result of him taking her for a ride one day and her seeing the house, is when she was satisfied with the house in the Southeast. And then from that point, he started getting the offers to come back home.
When you came back here, what was the first business that he became involved in?
He became involved with public relations, but I want to get you to kind of get a feel for our story when it comes down to land and land that's available, because they're not making any more land, even though the lands was redone and pioneered and settled by the settlers that came in. And then because of the history that we had, including the Civil War and the racism that flowed from it, all of the blacks that came out of the Civil War, came out of Reconstruction, it was all about obtaining land. Now, I work with an organization called the Federation of Southern Cooperative Land Retention Fund that has said that over 10 million acres of land has been lost by blacks in the last 100-some-odd years. So when you look at the migration of people from the south to the north, it also is a story around land and land obtaining and land loss and land retention that also must be introduced into the story. So whether or not my father was a carpenter or a businessman, those carpenters and those businessmen and those street sweepers were all about trying to raise a family on whatever holdings, if they had land. And we did have lots of land initially, coming from the plantation, coming from Reconstruction. But now we have very few pieces of property because of the systematic process of racism, as we all know. You know, the 100 years of lynchings and the struggles of the civil rights movement in order to try to re-salvage some of our dignity. But we also have to always keep in mind land and what we're able to obtain from the land. And part of that, my father's story, is one of his descendants, which is his great-grandmother, Emma Banks, was a slave who had about 100 acres of land in Jefferson County. So when my father came back, one of the first things he did was to try to re-salvage the land. So I have about a 50-page survey, don't have it today, but that talks of, it's the Emma Banks survey. Emma Banks was the wife of James Banks, and James Banks got land from Mr. Daniels. Now we're talking about slaves now. I don't know how far you can take back Mr. Daniels, but it's in the survey of 1928, the Emma Banks survey that talked about the 100 acres of land that created Zion City, was the land that my dad, when he came back with all of this knowledge, one being real estate, is to try to re-salvage that land into portions of it, which we still have to this day. So there's a land question we have to always keep in mind about all of the struggles and all the stories is what do we have now? Because a lot of times we talk about the black wealth gap that exists even to this day, where the average middle income family, black income family, is about 100 times less than that of a white person. It's because, and it's about the wealth accumulation and how it translates into the progenies, is that the term, progenies that come after them. How much, and that gap has not decreased, it's increased over time. And my family is on both sides of my family, we had land. We had a lot of land. My grandfather on my mother's side had 40 acres of land. He bought it in 41. I have a document where you see where my father, along with his brother-in-laws, are buying about 6 acres of the 100 remaining of the Emma Bank survey. And he's purchasing the land with $2,500, in which he's getting from my aunt, who in the document is signed by all of her brother-in-laws, including my dad. So that's just a portion of what he did when he returned. So in addition to trying to recover the land, he joined Jesse Lewis Associates as a public relations person. And when we talk to Jesse Lewis and Associates, in turn, who's still alive, he's also the editor of the Birmingham Times newspaper. When you ask him about my dad was a little older than Jesse. Jesse's still alive. But Jesse says that what he remembers about Paul Banks is that he had some land. And he hired my dad on, and my dad had the accounting expertise, strengthened the public relations component by also adding on more clients, and several more clients, Coca-Cola, potato chips, Golden Flake potato chips being one of them, which is the reason why we're here today, right? You know, because that's one part of the multiple businesses that my father had. Yeah, he was an entrepreneur for other businesses, as well as a creator and a pioneer of his own.
The first marketing campaign that he managed, specifically targeting African Americans for Golden Flake.
Well, if not Golden Flake, it was just other approaches that he took. We don't have a lot of information, Paula, on the National Guard Armory expos that he was doing, and so I know that it was in the National Guard Armory, which is where a building in the area where Legion Field is currently was the National Guard before it moved to its current location. But that National Guard Armory was a place where blacks could actually have businesses. And so because he was working with Jesse J. Lewis and Associates, then he was also able to get someplace that was large enough that would allow blacks to come into. The Bockwell was not available at the time. So the Bockwell being owned by the city. I don't know who Bockwell was. You know, that's worth research, but the portions about the businesses other than Golden Flake, just being one of them, was being promoted in an armory where you, for $5 you can come over to the armory and see a number of vendors or business that were available for blacks. I remember going into the armory one day when Plymouth being the low price three, was it Plymouth Chevrolet, the low price 3 cars. It was Plymouth, Chevrolet, and Ford. And there was a brand new Plymouth when you went to the door of the armory. that they were giving away for an auction, like a $1 auction lottery at the end of the 5-day expo, and it was $2,000. That's the first time I ever saw a $2,000 car. It had the wings in it. It just had to have been about a 51, because that's when they had all these wings on cars before they was eliminated. It was big and large, and it had to have been it was a $2,000 car. So you had the other three, but that was a Plymouth. And then you go into the building and you see all of the various types of other businesses that were available for blacks. Golden Flake was one of the businesses that my father promoted, and then over the years, as he picked up more clients, we would go on travels to Chicago from time to time. I remember going to a large event with the Shriners, which he was also a member of the Shriners, in which he was able to leave from a Shriners parade which we participated in, and then go across to see one of his clients that was in Chicago. It was, I'll tell you the name in a little bit, but that was one of them. In Birmingham, Golden Flakes was one of his many clients.
Tell me about the junior auction.
Okay, the junior auction. The junior auction was here, and it was on television. It was on television because it was an alternative to get into the black community and make tater chips more available, and market them to a black audience, a black market. And because we were eating tater chips just like the white folks was too, right? So we talking about 59, 58, we were having the experience of seeing on TV when TV first came out. You just 2 channels. And they did a lot of local programming. That means that rather than being syndicated, it was done right in the studio like this, and they would put on programs. One was a program that was dealing with hunting and fishing, and one was a program that dealt with the football review for some of the different coaches like Bear Bryant and Chuck Jordan, but Auburn had a half-hour review on Sundays. This was local programming. So on Saturdays, for the children, they had an auctioning off prizes in exchange for potato chip bags. And they had a person named Benny Carl. Benny Carl was representing the white audience and for white children. He would dress up in a clown outfit, and then he would actually auction off various types of prizes. The more expensive prizes that they were auctioning off would be based upon the denomination of the potato chip bag. Was you had a 5-cent bag, a 10-cent bag, you had a 25-cent bag. The kids would count the bags. It was more than a mouthful, but the kids would constantly buy save the bags, and then wrap them up, and then present them when it's time for them. That would be their bid. And it was very popular TV show, and it was the only thing on there for kids to really, other than the cartoons. So, this being a live show and having a local audience, Golden Flake approached my father and Mr. Lewis's public relations fund to see whether or not they can get a personality to also be available for the black audience as well, which led to, I think I was in the 5th grade when I went on TV one time. Out of the 4 episodes, I went on there one time, and it was only 4 that we were on TV on, but it was a black audience, so you had the white audience being Cousin Cliff, and then the black audience was Paul Banks. And then it only lasted after death threats. He'd be in Birmingham in 61, he had to come off the air. And it was very intense, because I can remember where we were living now in Titusville, we had to have a guard. We had a kind of local patrol rolling around our house in the community, because we were designated we were targeted for a bombing. My mother had me to come from the living, her front of the house her bedroom was in the front of the house. We moved to the back of the house and slept there for a few weeks until all of it died down. But it led to us coming off the TV altogether and coming into this theater right here, the Carver Theater. It was the dominant theater here out of the 4 that were during the times of segregation. So what was it like? Saturday morning, for 25 cents, you could come in this movie theater, and on stage would be my father, and to the right over here would be a bunch of prizes off stage, and then he would maybe have some small amount of entertainment or singing going on, such as like a small cabaret. Would be more adult than some of the other movie theaters that were around here during the times that kids were in school. But this was just basically for children, and it was the type of singing or entertainment was kid related. And then at a certain point, then he'll start the auction, and as they were being rolled, the prizes were being rolled in, then he would also roll the bags on out. He never counted the bags. He was just basically just giving the kids prizes and going on out. So this was going about for 25 cents. You could stay in the movie theater for all day long, because after Dad moved out, this went on about 6 months. So all over town, people knew this. The kids knew to save their tape bags. They save them, and you'll get prizes on Saturday.
Tell us about the times when you were here, when this was going on, and what your role was.
Well, I was in the 5th grade in about 61 and 2, and when I went on stage in the TV, it was just basically as his assistant, and also I was assistant here. I could not get a prize because it's nepotism. So I was just basically supporting and seeing my friends are out, seeing the smile on their faces and moving the prizes in and out, and taking the bags of tater chip bags and disposing of them. That was my job.
What were some of the prizes?
Bicycles. That was the big one. I don't think they ever had a TV unless during that time it was a black and white TV, and it would have been very small. So they were mostly dolls, skates, little holsters with little guns in them. It was a variety of stores, and it was several of them. So what you would have was that Golden Flake would buy these prizes, and then Dad would promote them. But but we have to also keep in mind that when Dad would go and get the check, he would always tell me that the owner of Golden Flake would never be in the office. And each time he would go get the check, which was about $500, he would leave it on his front desk, because they didn't want Dad, according to him, to come to be all within the inner sanctums of Golden Flake. It's early 60s. This is before King, before Shuttlesworth. It was, Dad was just as happy. He was all about supporting his family. It's all about making money. So my father came up really poor, and he never knew his father, because so the story of my father's life is that of as I say, of someone who grew up poor, never knowing his father, but also trying to develop an image of what a good father could be, a good provider could be, and how he could use his skills and his love of God in order to serve people in a way in which we could advance during a segregated South. It was in '63, when King came through on the invitation of the suffering of Shuttlesworth. Dad was in the bonding business then. You know, he had multiple jobs too as well. So he continued doing public relations. He broke from Jesse Lewis and did his own Banks, Moon and Lewis Association. Then there was All Banks Association. So he started pulling away, continuing to do business-related things. He got into the bonding business, and was doing the 1963 civil rights movement and marches that he was able to bond King out of jail. What happened was, from what I understand, and what he always talks about, is that it was so many children being arrested that the civil rights people and the entertainers around the country, wanting to support the movement, needed to get monies in for bonds. Other than that, then they would have remained in jail. So they reached out to my father's business, because he was in that business at that time as well, and sent him about $300,000 so that he can start bailing folks out of jail, the kids.
Hugely important role.
Yeah, for the time, yeah. And Abernathy and he got Dr. King and Abernathy and about 900 others children out of jail, you know, with the monies that were sent from, minus the monies, they would have remained. Because they were overflowing in the jails, and they were, you know the story, they were all at the 5 points, you know, outdoors, because the jails couldn't hold them. And that was the strategy. So King had gone to Albany and with limited success. And when he came to Birmingham, he did not want the same problems of just basically being locked up on bail. And they have small demonstrations, and they scoop them up and lock them up for a couple of days. They get out on bond. So that was a failure. Birmingham made King, and it was the children that were being locked up and overpowering the jail system that really brought, and of course the dogs and the water hoses that brought the attention to the nation. But it was depending upon who you talk to, a seminal event in what took place here. But we also have to always remember, in terms of what we obtained from this, there are a lot of people saying that intellectuals, people more than myself, would always tell you that the civil rights movement in our movement for rights was also saw the decline of our economic prowess and our economic power. So we started losing businesses that we were de-emphasizing. When we started moving towards being integration, just as King, you can just imagine with the King, with the A.G. Gasson Motel. A.G. Gasson had about 4 or 5 businesses himself, and that was the focal point for organizing the civil rights. But A.G. Gasson's Motel, just as soon as the public accommodations and the 64 and the 65 Civil Rights Act, we started going in the Holiday Inn and Days Inn, and we stopped going to A.G. Gasson. And then it turned into a boarding house, and then it went down it's just being revitalized now. Just think about that. King has been gone 50 some odd years, and now they're just doing A.G. Gasson's place. This whole street was including this building, is being, it's a monument to the very slow nature of development that came as a result of us leaving the community and making some attempts towards assimilation. But assimilation never occurred, and we in turn have lost a lot of our, or mostly all of our economic power. You know, that's what it is. You know, so then we have to still look at, again, what do we obtain when we went to integration, and what basically happened was a combination of things after King's assassination. We know that King when he was assassinated, was not a very popular figure amongst a lot of people. The civil rights movement had split, in 4 or 5 directions. And it was a tragedy, and that his prominence has come up as a result of his death. But it's all through the violence and his blood that was the sacrifice that immortalized him in the eyes of the world in a general sense. But it also met the fracturing of the movements. So what came out of those movements were the black nationalists, the cultural nationalists, the student movement, the Mao Zedong and the dialectical materialism, the African nationalism. It went into about 4 or 5 different directions. I was a student at the time in Atlanta, and I remember when King came through in '63, I was a high school student. I went to Holy Family High School, and when the children came out from Jackson Olin, Western Olin, running by our school, asking us to come out and be involved with it, I knew, because my daddy was a bondsman, that I could join them, and I did not. I've always thought about how I could be involved more had I went on and stepped through that door. The nun sent me to the door because I was a good guy at the time. To hold the door closed, all I had to do was just step out the door and join the crowd and come downtown. But what I in seeing Dad doing those evening times and ask him, what do you think I should do? And he said, what I want you to do is go into school, just go to school and stay out and make your impact when you go to school. And this is what I did. I went to school, but as you know, just 4 years later, King was assassinated. Being in school, and I took some pictures of me and the student, and what we were are the beneficiaries of a student deferment that was in clear effect in the 60s. Because if 65, when Johnson started escalating the war, every child that came out of high school that did not go to higher education, they immediately were sent to the front lines. They would go down to Columbus, Georgia, where Fort Benning was in Columbus, Georgia. About 5 weeks of basic training. Then they had some advanced infantry training in Fort Polk, Louisiana, for about a month. And then they off to Vietnam. The most popular boy in my senior class in 1966, named Roderick Talbot, he died before he got to be 20. He was 6'5" basketball player, very popular. He had a whole life career ahead of him. He didn't go to college. So I went to college, and I got a 4-year deferment. You understand? So, but I always think that it was a luxury, it was a privilege to be in school. The Birmingham draft board wasn't playing no jokes. I got some people, some friends of mine that I didn't know, because I got a D in English and I went to UAB when UAB first started opening up. So I took it over again because I was going to school year round. Because you always had to tell the Birmingham draft board what your status was. So I turned 18 in school. So when I registered, I also sent to them my registration into school. I was a full-time student. And then in the summertime, I actually continued to go to school because I didn't do that well in English, and that kept me in school. I have some friends of mine that went to Miles, did all right in Miles, but because they didn't go to summer school, he went to Vietnam in July. So in May he received a C. He was passing, but Miles then only had a certain amount of deferments that they would allow, and the Birmingham draft board snatched him up and put him in Vietnam. Now I didn't know this because I played tennis a little bit, right? I didn't know when he started talking about his Miles College, because he was a supporter of Miles College, but he couldn't grip his tennis racket as well because he had a wound. He was shot when he went to Vietnam. He was a student 1 year, and then he was still wounded in Vietnam. So those of us who stayed in school year round, it was a privilege to do this. Not just so much being involved in the area and trying to get the studies, but it was a way in which you could avoid the draft. So you need to take clear advantage of it, and that's what I always thought I was doing. When King was assassinated, though, it was another thing. So then when I was a sophomore, April the 4th, 1968, April the 5th, 1968, I was incarcerated. I was locked up for rioting. Dad don't know this, but I almost got shot over there trying to liberate a store. Standing in the store, in the window of a broken store that had been, Atlanta was just one place. It was 100 cities that went afire. I was just a student that got caught up in all of it, and because when we heard the word that King was assassinated, the gentleman that came on the stage, we were in a movie theater on campus. They stopped the movie and they asked, we just heard news from Memphis that King was assassinated. I don't know about you, I wasn't a follower of King, this is what he said, but I was a follower of King, but King is now dead. So that's what prompted me to go into the streets, because if what he was saying, that if they did that to the King of Love, what would they do that to us? So I was out of place, and I wasn't following what Dad had advised me to do. But that experience did see me incarcerated. I get out of and continue my education, but then because the student movement started, Black Power started, and you know how Black Power started. It came around the answer to the Meredith March. James Meredith had finished, he was supporting voting rights, had finished Mississippi, and he was marching from Jackson to Memphis, and he was shot by a Ku Klux Klan. So all of the various civil rights groups came together to ask to whether or not they wanted to complete the march. So you had SCLC and NAACP and CORE, and you had SNCC represented with Stokely Carmichael, that was marching from Jackson to Memphis, and in their marching, they would march 20 miles, and they would stay and have these night rallies in the park. And Stokely was not a total supporter of SNCC, which was really a student nonviolent movement. There were a lot of kids out of the black colleges dropping out of school, joining into voter registration drives. But even though it was all about registration for them, as well as it was for John Lewis, who had been recently, after Bloody Sunday and the Civil Rights Movement, still involved, there was a split there in which he was elected out of office, and then it became more politicized, and the division in the march led to them giving speeches to the people, and also talking about what do you want. So usually the cry was freedom, freedom now, like the Freedom Now Party. But on that particular march, it was Black Power. So so Black Power started being pushed by the civil rights people. And what were we to do, being on a school, with Morehouse supposedly being the Black Harvard of the South? So what were we supposed to do? So we got into the Black Studies. So the Black Studies movement stood up. So all over the country, all over the campuses, if you know, there were a lot of civil rights disturbances that flowed into Black Studies and studies on campus, anti-war demonstrations. They kind of met hand in hand. And you had kids getting killed, campuses that were being invaded, and it was a continuous thing in terms of trying to reinterpret what our place was in society.
Things were really going in a different direction when King was actually.
Absolutely, everything went in a different direction. 1968 was a pivotal year, just like '63 was. Look, I was glad to get to 1970. I didn't think we were going to get to I didn't think we were going to get to 1964, and then in the decade of the '60s, I was glad to get to 1970 because it was just that turbulent.
Say that your dad was a pallbearer at Dr. King's funeral?
No, I was the pallbearer. I was the pallbearer at Dr. King's funeral.
That?
Yeah, well, April the 5th was when I was locked up for basically looting and rioting. Okay, so that was on a Friday. So King was assassinated Thursday. I along with 3 other Morehouse students were incarcerated. We were taken upstairs we got the elevator ride, the notorious elevator ride in the Atlanta jail cell meant that it stopped on the way up, and we were fingerprinted and then placed on the elevator. 3 students in a tight elevator were being brought up to the 2nd or 3rd floor. They stopped the elevator right in the middle of the floor, and then the elevator operator, which was a jailer for Atlanta, commenced hitting us, and beating us up. You outside agitator niggers, y'all don't come into this town. And just hitting me in the stomach and hitting my other friends in the jaw and in the chest and everything. But we went to holler, no, we ain't gonna do it no more. So they stopped hitting us. We could have easily overpowered this one person in the elevator, but then we would have been probably Trayvon Martin. So they put us in the elevator. So from Friday night to Monday morning, so King's body was brought back to the campus. He was in Spelman's Chapel and lying in state for that weekend. So and after that, then the funeral started. So I didn't get a chance to see his remains. I got to tell you that the only time I saw King was in 1963 in the March on Washington. So I was there because of my grandmother. I always would go to see my grandmother every year since she was up in D.C. all the time. And in 1963, April, I saw King. So I didn't see him when he was in Sisters Chapel, but I was able to participate in his funeral because we got out on bond. We were released, and which was on that Monday. So Tuesday was his funeral. So we went on, took a bath, took a night's rest, jumped into some clothes like the Morehouse student that I was, which was asked to be a pallbearer or be a funeral person. So we lined up on the streets as the procession came around. You're talking about 100,000 people that came from Ebenezer Church, the old Ebenezer Church, straight down Hunter Street, past Morris Brown. They made the turn on Ashby Street, came up, made another left turn on Fair Street, and I was standing on Fair Street. And when King's mule-drawn carriage came right by the door, right by me, and then I was engulfed into the crowd. So we just sat there all day long watching dozens and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. But then when the mule-drawn carriage came by, that's where we were, and it was just engulfed into all of it. So that was and everybody. You had the stars that were there. Everybody was there. King's body was moved to Southview Cemetery for a short period of time while Cloretta raised the money to build the place where the two of them are now resting. So that's we're talking about a couple, 2 or 3 year period. And so it was, now my story kind of takes a little bit of hinge, and it got my dad much more involved with all of the various tremendous things that he was doing in Birmingham. There are millions of people who didn't succeed as much and still struggling against all the oppression and things that you know so much about. But I've always seen us as being equal and not being different at all. We are children of God, all of us are, and that's going to always be my testimony. And the word from God is love. But what has happened in America is that, we're dealing with all these different experiences that it came because of one group who came from one part because of the color of their skin, and their religion came onto another place and took over from the people that were there and started defining themselves based upon their experiences and their family and their conquest of the land. So it's all about land for me and land development for me and how you are and how when the people come up and get involved with it. My dad's story is that his story is that, as I say, he got all these different skill sets. He came up in poverty too, did not know his father. But then it all tails into each and every person, whether or not they knew their father or not. We all are common, and we all trying to relate to our opposite sex in order to develop families, and then we have to corral our families, the children, our offsprings, and with the hopes of them coming up in life. That's what my dad had for me. He wanted me to step out and be. See, I always want to talk about my portion of the family because the only time I saw my dad cry was related to something that was happening to me, or something that was happening to his business and how he was being treated, and how he tried so hard at trying to hold these businesses up, and how his employments was being invaded by underpaid and unappreciative staff people. My dad had a strong sense of business development. When he got started in these businesses, the labor people were not together. There was attempts to try to start a union. And then people would, because he was in a unique type business, the armored car business, it also caused him a lot of pain because they was dealing with armored car. He had millions and multi-millions of dollars transporting. He had insurance for transporting. He had insurance for storage. That was, and then he had to buy vehicles that were very expensive. But the staff people wouldn't take care of the vehicles. The staff people were stealing from him 2 or 3 or 4 time occasions and everything. And my dad wasn't a rich person at all. He was just rich in his love for his people and his intellect. But he was not, people just think Mr. Banks had money, but Mr. Banks basically he had love, and he had interest and insight, but he was being somewhat undermined by some of the same people that he was trying to help, and our major competitors, because they flowed from the bank, like Wells Fargo, was a major competitor. They were able to pay their people much higher than my father could pay them.
Honey Bowl. Tell us about the Honey Bowl and how that developed, the partnership with Brunswick, and yeah.
Well, as I say, Dad got into businesses from the fact that he was an entrepreneur. He had the skill set. He was promoting other businesses. From time to time, he would see business opportunities for the community and then for himself. So in Titusville is where we moved to after we moved from Poly Hills and Pacifico. When we moved to Titusville, which was a growing community. It's another lesson about land in terms of how that was one of the only communities, one of the very few communities that was built for blacks and by blacks. Because at that time there were black general contractors and skilled people who some of them worked in the mines, but they had skill sets that they were able to build all of Titusville. And then Dad had, with this same strength, what's the term, acumen? Yeah, acumen. So with the same strength, acumen that he had, he was able to identify other business opportunities. Honey Bowl was one of them. And when they were, the approach of let's say, of public relations is when you get the stars out in order to also promote the product that you may be able to identify with. Hank Aaron in '57 won the World Series in Milwaukee. And not just him, Willie Mays, both of them were prominent Negro League football players who played in Rickwood Field and played in the Industrial League. The Industrial League being a league that was promoted by the various different industries that were around here that would either work the person until he died, or either if he had some kind of athletic ability, there was industrial leagues that would be paying in the places around the industries. So Dad was able to get Hank to come down to promote one of his products. In this case, it was Honey Bowl Land. I think he also came down one time earlier for a hamburger spot that may have been located on the next block on right off from Killing Park. There was a hamburger chain that was trying to get started. Either it was Mays or either it was Aaron. But Aaron was from Mobile. Mays was from Fairfield. And there's a picture with Hank with three people standing up. And one is I think it's Piper Dave. He's a Negro League baseball manager. And they're standing with a doctor. He's kind of light-skinned, but I found out that he's a dentist in Mobile back in the day, between Mobile and Pritchard. And that particular scene shows Dad sitting in front of them with Hank discussing the Honey Bowl enterprises that they had. And Dad was there. Paul Banks is there from Birmingham because they had a building in Birmingham. They have Honey Bowl in Birmingham, sponsored by Brunswick. And there were also plans on starting one up in Mobile, a Honey Bowl in Mobile, a Honey Bowl in Sweetport. There was 2 or 3 other places that's mentioned in the article. Aaron came to Birmingham to support either that or 2 or 3 other businesses. That's how Dad was able to relate to them as they reach out to sports figures, and because he was from Alabama.
You got a souvenir for you?
Yeah, I do. I did. I got a baseball that has Hank Aaron's name on there. Paul, best wishes, Paul Jr. It's kind of faded now, but it's one of my pride and joys. I call him the God of Homers when he broke Babe Ruth's record. And I was in Atlanta, not in the stadium when he broke Babe Ruth's record in '94. But I saw him in one of the Braves recognition days after he retired, and I gave him the God of Homers. The God of Homers is who he was. Yeah, but Dad was Dad was related because of his, I guess, the duality of who he was in the business community, and also as a Shriner, is also in the religious community. He was well known.
Tell us about some of there are so many businesses that he was involved in or owned.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about some of the smaller ones, grocery stores.
I think probably is, again, as I say, Titusville was a new developing area, and only for us that some of the business that flow from, which is the institutions that support the businesses, that our church was in Titusville. He was from a small family, relating to a larger family. My mother had 5 brothers, where on one of the corners, right down the street from his bonding company, he developed a relationship in the corporate world with Gulf Service Station. Gulf is now BP. British Petroleum, I guess they conglomerate. But then what happened was they were able to get him to a service station. And that business was given, at one point, had my uncle on there, Maxie's Gulf Service Station. That's how I learned how to change tires and change oils in cars. I got that experience with him, working with my uncle, Maxie. There's a building there, and I got some pictures of the building that once was a grocery store. Theodore Miller was the brother to Maxie, but they call him Pete. He's my mother's youngest brother. Had a store over on right around the corner down the street. So he put one of his other uncles, one of my uncles, his brother-in-law, into a store. Yeah, so he had multiple business in that particular area. He was one of a number of business owners, is what I'm saying, throughout. Where you had TV repair people that were across the street. You had several principals of high schools and doctors, lawyers, no engine chiefs, but they had every different type of skill set that was right in the Titusville area. Those buildings still stand. The building, his last business, is the most prominent business we're talking about, is a business that's been repurposed again, according to her, what she's saying now, which is great. It keeps that legacy going on, even of the business. Already, it has a placard for the 2 businesses that were there previously. Now it's going to be repurposed into another business, and that's tremendous. But Dad, and I have it on his funeral program, that he was a father of that, not just me, but many different names, many different people. Whenever I got riding around town with him, and people always would know him. Dad had, and I failed to mention, at 12 years old, he walked with a limp. So he was injured in a little sandlot baseball accident, but because of the poor medical care at that time, they weren't seeing about broken hip black kids too long. That he agonized for a whole year in pain, and then grew out of it, but his leg was short. One leg was shorter than the other. So he always had elevated shoes on all the time. Always had a suit, but he always had a extension attitude.
How the injury occurred?
I think it was just playing football and piling on. One of the kids, 2 or 3 of the kids just fell on his leg and broke his hip. But he was 12 years old, and he didn't get the care. Yeah, later on, I mean, when he had the money, he was already. My dad grew to be about 6 feet, and I always sometimes think is that because he couldn't play sports, he became a Renaissance person in so many other areas. He was a musician. I one time bought my dad, for his birthday, a saxophone that I saw in the pawn shop. I was so anxious to present it to him because I heard that he was with Parker High School with some of the same people that are in the Jazz Hall of Fame here. And when I showed him the saxophone, he looked at it, but he'd embrace it because he was a clarinet player. Yeah, he could play it, but he couldn't. Yeah, he has the wrong instrument, but he could play it. He organized the first band at Morehouse when he went to Morehouse. Yeah, but Dad, I always relate back to what I am and what I became and what his thoughts of us were, particularly when after I was arrested the last time and then had the conviction that that was erroneous, that's never been resolved. But Dad had the wherewithal to try to get it, and that's another time when I saw him cry real tears in terms of his trying to had to see his son go to jail, you know, for a crime I didn't commit, and then how he was able to keep a great face and keep things going on at home and support my family while I was gone. At the same time, I mean, he was just a person of tremendous potentials. But then towards when Mother passed in '91, he somewhat started losing a lot of focus in terms of all of the businesses that he had, because they were so close. He married shortly thereafter and then left the city. But when he left, Dad had at least, talking about land now, he had about 15 different pieces of property all over the city. He was able to, because he's an entrepreneur, he not the best of all managers, because he couldn't manage his labor force, but he had the vision to start buying properties early on during the time when Birmingham started experiencing the loss of population. He had land in Titusville and he had businesses in Titusville, and as well as my mother.
It was a construction business that he owned?
No, he supported one of his clients. He didn't own this construction business. One of his clients was a construction person, right? That built one of the three blacks that were building all over Titusville was one of his clients. Yeah, and he was able to our new church where he was actually ordained in is a church that he on the building committee saw to it's being constructed. And we have so many different documentations of them moving from the old church to the new church that presently sits there. He came up in the church of my grandmothers and grandfathers, and he came right on up, joined the church, Sunday school teacher, deacon, trustee board deacon, minister. And after he became a minister, it was just after my mother had passed, and he moved away from the church. Because he's a practicing Lutheran church, even though he was Lutheran minister, even though he was a Baptist laying of hands is how he came in.
So you were speaking earlier, you started to talk about the armored car business. And apparently, I mean, that was his main career, right?
That was his last career. That was his last career, not his main career, because I think Dad got into the armored car business and became the only independent armored car minority in the country. But he got into that business when he was almost about my age. Yeah, in his late 60s or so. I don't know exactly what, but we can tell you the year if you needed it. But that was as a result of him being a minority business developer. He's put many other businesses in. He got into the armored car business because he was before, he was in the security guard business, and before the security guard business, he was in the janitorial business. One of his clients was a janitorial person that became a millionaire, Falls Janitorial Contracts. And it was from working with Falls, because what Dad's primarily job as a minority business developer was to know insurance, knowing the law, and also identifying the financing people from the corporate world. Some of them would have been people who he represented for other folks in terms of financing and accounting. So he would help people write business plans. And one of the business plans that he wrote was for a successful janitorial business. And then when the janitorial business, Mr. Falls, got so expanded around the same time that Dad decided to branch out on his own, because he was a janitorial, he was a manager and of Magic City Economic Development, was up under the Small Business Administration. It was a government contract that he was managing for about 20-some years. Yeah. So and then from that he was able to discern where the financing was, and he had the skill set in combination for others when he moved away from a government contract, and he just opened his own business up.
He was involved with was it the Department of Commerce, did you say 20 years?
The Magic City Economic Development, during this time I was living in Atlanta, but I'm going to say some of the 80s, mostly all of the 70s. All of the 70s is when he was working, and he worked for JCCEO for a minute, and then he went into as an assistant director. But the minority business development, it was called, they had a division called OMBE, Office of Economic Business Opportunity, which was a division up under the Small Businessmen Association, is that he was able to put many people in business. And as the contract was on for about 15 or some odd years, it was challenged by some other business people, and they felt like Dad should not be getting the bulk of the business money that was coming from OMBE to the neighborhood. It's just the lack of unity, the trust thing that flows back and forth between the middle income folks, black primarily, jealousy. You know, it's in so many different areas, but jealousy takes on different form when it comes in the black community, because black people really, for the most part, don't really own our communities, and we really don't have dominance and power in our business. So it means that you have a two-tier kind of economy that was going on that's always was flowing even before the civil rights movement. Civil rights was about the politics and voting, but when you're talking about money in terms of how it's the layer and how it's distributed, and like a second economy that kind of flows right along, but always under. Sometimes we can peak and valley, just like the economy can peak and valley. We suffer more, the business suffer more if the economy overall goes to a depression. So when it was rising up a little bit back in the late 70s, after Nixon, there were opportunities for others to want to join in and replicate what Dad was doing. So that there was after 15 to 17 years, there was a delay of his funding, and he had a staff of about 8 people that he had to pay on the payroll at that time. And he decided that once the controversy was cleared, and they saw that Dad was the only person that was doing a great job and could continue to do the great job, why would they want to put it to somebody else who was inexperienced and didn't know what they were doing. They ended up giving him the money about 6 or 7 months late, and he decided that he told them that's okay, keep the money. He closed the office down. Then that's when he formed General Services and start doing some of the same type businesses that his clients were doing at that time. And then and John Tory business was the first one. And then the security guard came the next. When he was doing the security guard work now, he had the Bruno's stores. Joe Bruno's family owned a number of grocery stores around town, a bunch of them. They got their start in the black community. The city was now, after King's assassination, was turning more and more black. So the white flight was in full effect. Suburbs were being created. You had Hoover was born in 67 is when Hoover started. It's all about land. So you had a few families start moving away from Birmingham, and Birmingham started losing population. And as he started losing population, then more opportunities started coming for blacks who were now moving into the other parts of the city. So they were moving out of Titusville, but moving in areas that were formerly areas that were the whites lived. They were leaving them. Some of the houses that they had were turned into Section 8, but then because there was a dominant underclass that were living in the housing communities that were being inherited, I guess you would say, to replacing, even in the housing communities, those whites that were in the housing communities that started moving and moving up and moving out into the suburbs with the helps of the funding of the banks that got their start in Birmingham. Birmingham had about 5 or 6 different banks that got started because of the steel mills. Steel mills closed, and the banks moved on and started developing other communities, other cities. Through these bedroom communities became focal points around malls, and then it continued to flow. So opportunities became more and more. So they started replicating those businesses. Grocery stores were the last ones to move out, and because people have to eat. So Bruno's became a millionaire, and he needed someone to watch his stores. A lot of people think about crime as being always evident. That's just an excuse, I think, political explanation that comes from all these politicians when they say they want to come about crime. They weren't talking about crime when all these cities, which were created for white people, were populated by white people. It wasn't no crime. The only crime they talked about was maybe a riot every time, or a crime when a black person that migrated up into their jobs from picking cotton or something, and got these menial jobs, because they needed the labor force. They wouldn't talk about crime until they took a job from a white person. So when they started leaving the communities, leaving the cities, leaving their houses, renting the houses out to us, then we had more opportunities. And so we started moving into the cities and having more. And Dad pushed the business portions of it all the way through. And now he was, in his later years, moving on to his own business. And the armored car business kind of flowed away from the security guard business, because he was doing security work for Joe Bruno. Joe Bruno's, when he talked to Joe about how was his guards doing in his stores, and Joe said, well, y'all doing a real good job, and if you could take my money to the bank, then you could have more opportunities. And then Dad just started, then it just started going for him. He ended up going to find out what it would take to get into the armored car business. And so the armored car business started flowing from the security guard business.
Because of his reputation, he got a loan from BT&B pretty quickly, right?
Well, Birmingham, it was Birmingham Trust National. It was Birmingham Trust National Bank, right? Before it was Bank South. Birmingham Trust National Bank was dealing with him from everything from his house note to his son's student loan. You know, I didn't go to school on no scholarship, but and I did not go to school on financial aid either. Mom and dad, they were both two income people that constantly worked, and as a result of their working, they would put me and my sisters through school. So what? And his credit was just outstanding. His credit, and when he started going to the bank and telling them, well, I'm going to start hauling Joe Bruno's money, and then what it's going to take, I need a truck. I was in the I came to Birmingham because I was back and forth working with him some. One of the managers from South Trust, they changed the name to South Trust, right? They came to him and offered him a $50,000 signature loan for anything he wanted. He told me, he said, man name was Miller. He said, Mr. Miller just came here the other day and offered me a $50,000 line of credit, and I didn't have no need for it. He said, well, I think I'll try to go. I'll get another truck. You know, that's how he was very prudent with his money. All he did is taxes, and other folks' taxes as well as his own taxes. Very prudent.
So he started with how many trucks and ended up with how many trucks?
Well, it was routes. I would think trucks. You know, trucks come on. He started with just one route and ended up with about five routes. So you had different trucks coming in and doing routes. Our biggest piece was the Olympics in '96 when we were approached by a concern that wanted to load up ATMs in the Atlanta business ring, in the Olympic corridor, the Olympic Village. And their business plan was to have 50, this was in '96 when they just started making mobile ATM machines. So they needed to have 50 loaded before the Olympics came there in various places all around the city. This was their plan. And they were going to charge about, I think it was $5 per transaction. You know, what it's $3 now. But their plan was so expansive, they thought that they could come in with enough machines to make $5 per transaction because it was all over the country. The world, all over the world, people were coming to Atlanta. So what happened was there was a lag time for the machines to come online. Dad had to get a $50 million line of credit. That's what the key piece was. And his insurance was not. He had to get a insurance to cover the transport of as much as $50 million. Store that much, based upon the money coming in from the Federal Reserve out of New Orleans. But as the lag time started backing up, because it meant they had to hook the computer up, hook the telephone lines up, and hook up the electricity to one machine that was located in multiple locations around town, and that meant the wiring had to be done. You had to have an electrician person on the spot, and the internet was just really coming up online in '96, and it was a slow process. So then they got when Dad negotiated the contract, and we were to get about so much money. They loaned a portion of the money, and they sent a portion of the money to New Orleans out of 50 million that they had about, and when we were insuring 50 million, they only had about $15 million that was sent. They started sending out at a time that was sent from New Orleans to us. So we had, out of the 50 million that we were carrying in insurance, 15 was in our vault. And then we were looking at maybe getting a temporary safe and have the insurance in Atlanta. But I went around looking for different buildings for a time, but then in the end we decided we were just going to just keep the money and the insurance on the truck. So each night, as we were getting the notice that we were going to load up the various ATM machines, when we get the order that 1 or 2 or 3 were coming online out of the 50, then we'll get enough money to load up those coming in from Birmingham on the truck. So we brought the trucks all the way in to those ATM machines. One of the ATM machines was located at one of the hottest ones we had was located at an adult, what they call Teddy Bar, right down the street from where the bomb went off. It was right down the street where the adult club was. So the driver at the time told me that they heard and they shook the truck. Yeah, so that was in '96. So we basically was running money, bringing monies in, as opposed to having a branch location in Birmingham, in Atlanta. Now, Dad had security guard businesses in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Mobile, because he took advantage of the Commerce Department 8 contract, in which they had a minority set aside for 5 years. He finally matured from that. But at the time we had locations in about 30 guards in Alabama, in Mobile. What it required was that we had a public service commission permission to transport goods from county to county. He had to get a special. It was not so much a special license, but it was challenged by Brinks and Wells Fargo. So that's what we went to court. He had a hearing. I brought in proof of insurance from Marks, and he was in court. Asked me to go to Marsh and McLendon and bring in the proof of insurance to the judge, and he called me up one day and told me, Lathia, I need you to do something for me now. You just listen to your daddy, And it was very clear because they both had protested him having the ability to transport. It was a big contract on food stamp contract. That's what it was. The food stamps were at the time, before it was the EPT card, they were sending in to us large, we were the lowest bidders on all these containers and boxes of food stamps, and taking them and loading up all these different offices. And the Public Service Commission had a hearing on it because it was a protest by Brinks and Wells Fargo, which was our major employer, major competition.
How did they how did they protest that?
They filed a suit with the Public Service Commission that we didn't have insurance, that we didn't have the capability of doing this, even though we had a lower bid. With the lower bid came the challenges of those who had higher bids, and it was all around insurance. So once we showed they had insurance to cover the contents in the vault, that's the proof of insurance, the contents in the vault and the contents that's being carried on the truck. Yeah, so that was a milestone as well.
It says a lot that the business was a challenge to the likes of Wells Fargo and Brinks.
Yeah, well, they had new insurance. He was insurance when I was born. He was insurance sales when I was born. So we're talking about like 50 years of knowing insurance. I think We did have one, the contract with Lords of London, the one with the Olympics, because it was so high, it came through Lords of London. Yeah.
What have we not touched on that you recover it finally?
I believe you
I feel like you've been banished to the side of the room.
It's just wonderful.
I wanted to kind of tie back into the land piece, though, in terms of the last remigration. Because Dad went, as I say, he went into the ministry. Okay, he went into the ministry in his later years, after Mom passed. I asked him, I came over for a trial sermon. I said, well, Dad, you know, all these years that I've known you, you've been a businessman. You know, I pass by the street, people don't know me, they know you. They, you know, hollering, seeing even your old age, they always recognize you. And now you are in the ministry. And he says that, I've always had the calling. That's what he said, I always had that calling. So all I said was during the time of, what we supposed to call you now, Reverend Dad? You know, because I mean, he was Dad all the time. So, you know, but he went on, he eulogized my mother before he went into the ministry. And that was a big thing for me and my sister. But in his eulogy of mother, he always hit the standard thing about the beginning and the end of a person's life that's on the tombstone. This is what I have a picture of, the 22 to 2016, those years that represented his life. And that's why I also have on the tombstone businessman, minister, and then child of God. See, the businessman first, but minister, and then, but we all the children of God. And that's on his tombstone. But when he talked for Mom, he was not in the ministry, but you can see that he laid out the whole funeral of Bush Lawn being a black entrepreneur that he put into that he expanded during the time when he was in business. Now Bush Lawn was handling my mother, his wife. Bush Lawn, they did a tremendous job. You know, it was a great funeral. But as funerals go, but then he wanted to also speak in the funeral, and in his speeching for her, he said that that Maddie got off the bus. A bus stop took place when Mom passed, and she got off on the bus. But we all have to ride on, you know, and we all have to just move towards with God, which. That's my explanation in terms of how he got into the ministry after that. You know, he was not. He was the chairman of the deacon board that helped run one of the other ministers out that wasn't up to the standard of the church. But I never would have thought that it went from not going to Sunday school when I was forced to go by my mother, and she would tell me that. I don't care what you do on Saturday night, you're going to go to Sunday school. But Dad would be staying in bed. But then at one point in time, he started going to Sunday school. And then he started teaching Sunday school. He was doing all these other business things all over town, seeing to another church being built, and then being on the business committee. But he started going to church. He started getting involved. Then he started teaching Sunday school. And then he got on the trustee board and deacon board. But then after Mom passed, he went into the ministry. And he was there until the end of his life. I've heard him come and do sermons, and more than one time, and his sermons were inspirational. And so that's the other portion of his life. As I say, I saw him cry for his businesses, but I think the most amount of emotion and joy that I've felt from my daddy was when he was singing in the choir. You know, I remember one time sitting over there with my sister and everything. When Dad cranked up, I heard, you know, she's a lawyer, but she's also the high C soprano singing, opera singing. And when Dad cranked up, you can see where she got her chops from. And then you wonder, what was that? What part of his spirit was that coming from? But then later on, now he became a minister. So it's just a tremendous respect to him. I always knew that that I couldn't step in his shoes, and I've spoken his funeral twice. I'm so glad to talk about him now because I remember throughout his life, because it was so exemplary, that what would I say when he passed, you know? But now you give me opportunity to talk about him even further along, and that's why I kind of loop all of it around. His example and his experience is like so many other people who are also successful too, and what they do despite all the observations. You know, we still have an extraordinary God that looks over all of us, despite the depressions. You know, his story is inspiration like so many others, but how he led into the ministry is only way a reflection of extension now. I never thought I would go that way, but I do really feel in terms of my religious experience that where he was going is where we all have to go. Where we all will go, whether or not we will go willingly or unwillingly, or whether we go in the opposite direction. That's up for God to decide. But we just have to just try to be as positive and as loving and as supporting to us to the degree of our experiences and our skill set. And he had many skills, so he was a multiple contributor toward the love that God worked through him. You know, so that's where it is with all of us.